keeping exactly on time. I'm going to open up the discussion now, so you probably know how this works. If you raise your hand, I can call you up. You have to come and use this mic up here, so I might call 2 or 3 people at a time, and if you go and wait in line in the order I've called you. We're going to keep the contributions limited to 3 minutes so we can get as many people up here as we can. After 2.5 minutes, I'll knock on this to give you 30 seconds to sum up. After 3 minutes, I will interrupt you, and after 3.5 minutes, I will come and remove you from the stage. Yeah, but feel to ask any questions. You don't have to make a 3-minute contribution. You can just come up and ask a question if you like. So yes, I'm going to open up. And, yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I think that the way the discussion has been opened by looking at this issue from the point of view of the state, the democratic state, and democracy is a process of empowerment for everybody. Yeah? And are these two working together? Can they seem to have done it at times historically, and are they doing it now? That's a big question. The other point is that perhaps it's not really emerged enough, is that the attack on democracy is actually coming from capitalism itself at the moment. So what provoked the crisis in Italy and in Greece is actually the rating agencies with their A, and stuff like that. So there is a real attack on, from the capital, from the turmoil of capitalism. There is an attack to the national state. And also there is an attack to the Western kind of democratic states. And there is an attack on Europe. I mean, and this is something that we perhaps need to think about a little bit. Where do we stand then? So just to open up more of the various layers of this really very complex issues. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a kind of paradox really around this question in the society at the moment, because on the one hand, people certainly are questioning whether or not at least a certain form of democracy is worth defending, for the reasons that Andrew said, that the depth of the neoliberal offensive is removing the democratic elements of the society, is increasingly giving you a political system in which there are no meaningful alternatives provided by the major parties. I think it was Noam Chomsky that described the American political system as a totalitarian system with 2 different factions. But the trouble is that a lot of Western Europe is beginning to look like that. Greece and Italy are beginning to look like that, and this is a massive force which is eroding people's participation rates in elections, never mind about their faith in the outcome of elections. And then there's a second element which I think has been very important in the last 10 years, and that is that democracy has become the ideology of war. We're in Afghanistan to teach people who haven't got democracy that they should have it, and they should have it this way, and they should have it at the end of a bomb. We're in Iraq to teach people that they aren't democratic enough, and we're going to bomb them into democracy. We're talking about doing the same to Iran. So for many, many people, a democracy is simply a facade for colonial style interventions in other people's country, and this is having a corroding effect on the whole idea. But the paradox comes from this fact, that at the same time that this has been happening, every modern revolution of any scale has been fundamentally a democratic revolution. The Arab revolutions may be pregnant with more and different outcomes, but as they stand in Egypt and Tunisia, in Yemen, in Bahrain, whether they've succeeded partially or are still fighting, they are about the desire for democracy. The same was true in the Indonesian revolution. The same was true in the fall of apartheid. The same has been true in practically every modern revolution. And we have to say that when the scale of a movement over decades presents that as its immediate objective, you have to take cognizance of that. And what we have to say is, we're not defending the democracy that exists, we're fighting for a different form of democracy, for a deeper form of democracy. I think it was Hilaire Belloc that said about England, that in England, the law in its majesty allows everybody to be equal. They're equally free to dine at the Ritz or sleep under Lambeth Bridge. And we all know that economic inequality, economic exploitation undermines democracy, because in the second Labour election, the first person through the door of number 11 Downing Street was Rupert Murdoch. Now, he doesn't even able to vote in this country, but we all know that economic concentrations of power corrupt democracy. So what we're fighting for is certainly the defence of what democracy we have from people who are trying to take it away from us, but we're really fighting for a democracy which includes the ability to control the economic mechanism of the society as well as the political mechanism of the society, because that's the only real democracy that there is. And the historical word for that struggle is a struggle for socialism.
It was exactly that point I wanted to pick up on. I think when we're discussing democracy, I think there's 2 points which we have to start off with in terms of framing the debate. The first one is, what is democracy? And the second one is, where do we stand in relation to that? In terms of democracy, I think there's three terms which sum up to me. One is accountability, the second one is representation, the third one is going beyond that into participation directly in it. In terms of accountability, in the limited democracy that we have, the number of elected posts, democratically elected posts that we have, which are subject to immediate recall as a principle of democracy, is tiny, if there are any at all. And I think that really demonstrates quite well what the restrictions on our current democratic system are. In terms of representation, if we look at the number of all the posts in our current system of governing our society that have defined parameters and defined roles within our society, how many of them are actually democratically elected? And the answer is an infinitesimally small amount of them when you take into account the wider free market economy. And nobody in this society votes for the managers, nobody votes for the directors. And these are all things which as a call centre worker in Glasgow, I would very much like to elect my managers, given the standard of the competency, not only in running their teams, but also or running the capitalist system. Like, it's a bad idea and you can't even get that right. And thirdly, I think we have to go beyond electing other people to do jobs for us. I think we need to really talk about getting changing, having people that make decisions and have political discussions over the contradictions, and the people that actually go out and do stuff, and whether that's actually building stuff with their hands or campaigning in the streets and putting up posters and flyers and the kind of stuff that we do. We need people to be doing the same thing. That goes as much for the economy and our political spheres as it does for our campaigning work as leftists. And I think we need to build all of these threes in our work that we're doing at the moment, but we also need to campaign them for them generally in our society. Thank you.
Yeah, I just would like to remind people of the very fact that neither the Tories nor the Lib Dems actually went into the elections in 2010 announcing that they would cut public services by 40% and thus have no mandate to cut. Neither were they actually elected on a majority. And that's why we saw the student demonstration taking up the questions of democracy in such a stark way, really flagging up that the Lib Dems had gone into the fight, into the elections, proclaiming for free education, and suddenly we're ratcheting up tuition fees to £9,000 a year. And that picture is repeating itself in Spain, and it has repeated itself at the beginning of this century when the IMF came to Argentina. And one of the main slogans in Argentina was "Que se vayan todos." They all must go. And in the same vein, actually what we saw in Spain with the Indignados movement and Democracia Real Ya, Real Democracy Now, was they don't represent us. And that really echoes across the globe when we see the movements arising at this time. But what does real democracy actually look like? Because if you live until 80, you might have 30 minutes of democracy at a ballot box. But what real democracy would look like is actually how are things produced, what things are produced, for whose purpose are things produced. And actually the slogan from Occupy Wall Street, "We are the 99%", means that we need to say we need a society run in the interest of the 99%. But all the odds are stacked against us. Because if you look what's happening in Greece and Italy, actually it resembles pretty much a Chinese democracy. No one talks about what the European Parliament is doing. Actually, it's the European Central Bank which takes all the decisions. But there's solutions to the problem, and we're seeing those solutions being made at this current conjuncture in Greece. Steel workers have occupied their factories for nearly 4 months now, and in Greece, a newspaper, the Eleftheropia, has been occupied now, and they're producing a paper. We can run this society without bosses, without managers, without CEOs, and ultimately it's the kind of workers' democracy that we need to be striving for at this period and putting a real alternative to the austerity agenda onto the table.
I don't want to just repeat what everybody else has been saying, really, and that was nicely put, Matt. But do we live in a democracy? Just ask yourself, do you get a chance to vote on what time you start work? Do you get a chance to vote on how much you get paid? Do you get a chance to vote on what you produce? We don't live in a democracy. We live in a fake democracy. The question that was asked for this meeting, I think, was, is democracy worth defending? Too bloody right it is. We live in a sham democracy. We only get the crumbs that the bastards have allowed us to have. But it's been bought at the price of the blood of our mothers and fathers, our grandmothers and grandfathers. And this isn't metaphorical, mythical, allegorical blood. Listen to the song, Strange Fruit. People died in the United States to be allowed to have the right to be treated as human beings. That wasn't just, oh, the bloody Americans, that's them all the time. Peterloo Massacre in this country, where the mounted militia charged a crowd of working people in the 19th century and literally sabred men, women and babes in arms to death because they dared to ask for the right to have some say in how their lives were run. So when Andrew says there's a nasty move going on to chip away at the limit of the limited democracy we've got at the moment, he's right. We should cling like grim death to every little scrap of democracy that we've been able to wring out of bastards, but not for 1 second fool ourselves that that is the end of the argument. And I'll just close on this. If I sound a little bit passionate or a little bit angry about this, I'm 55. You wouldn't believe it looking at me. I don't want my grandkids to grow up having to be grateful if they're lucky enough to be getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to work a 10 or 11-hour shift doing shit. Because that is what we are facing if we allow those bastards that run us at the moment to carry on. So I'm absolutely with the comrades at the front here. Democracy is worth defending, but let's make it our democracy and kick those bastards out for once.
Yes, I just wanted to latch on to what Andrew was saying about Italy. I spent the last 2 months in Italy living at home with my parents, and I'm 28. Despite this, that is the most common experience of my friends, being at home, unemployed, and living with your parents. I mean, in the country, youth unemployment is about 35%. And what does the technocratic Monti government do in this situation? It raises the retirement age of some years. My mother is 59, she has been working since she was 19, and she has to work now for another 4 or 5, nobody knows how long, actually years, because of these reforms. Will you believe that this is a good way to tackle youth unemployment? Of course it's not. The point, anyway, is in this situation, a lot of people look really disaffected from politics. As Andrew was saying, there is a sense of alienation. And there was a survey which was saying something quite striking. About 1/3 of young people in Italy say that they distrust democracy. But in this situation, that's not surprising. And the real issue is actually, it's not that they don't care. It's not that they do want an authoritarian government, not at all. The point is that they perceive that politics is really detached from their lives. When it comes to social movements, which are really kind of dealing with issues, with topics which are close to people's life, like the battle against the high-speed railway in northern Italy, you can see really movements blossoming up throughout the country, which means there is a potential to do politics, there is a potential to fight, to change the system. The real point is that people who are politically active have to be within the movements, look at what the real issues are that people feel, and fight for change, not just act within political institutions which are at the moment really distant from the people's life and people's interests.
Thank you. I thought that was really interesting, and thank you, Andrew and Danielle. Thank you for coming all the way over from France. We're looking forward to the election results in April as well. I just thought I'd pick up on what you said about the offensive fight and the sort of continued fight for democracy, and Richard had touched upon this. And it is just, there's this kind of myth that our rights were given to us, that one day the government kind of woke up and thought, oh, I'm feeling beneficial today, I'm going to give you the NHS, or give you, like women, the right to vote. And it's ridiculous really, because every single right that we have was won. The right for men to vote, the right for women to vote, the fact that we have an NHS. And the second you stop fighting for these things, you see the kind of thing that's happening now, like the rolling back of the NHS, the attacks on our universities, and the attacks on democracy. So I just think it's really important to emphasise that we keep, that it's always going to be an offensive fight. We can never settle down and think, oh, this can be, a defensive fight, or or we can just like take the day off. And then a point that Andrew made about how we actually go about this. And I mean, you mentioned that the trade unions are the best way of advancing this struggle, and I agree with that, like, to an extent, and I think Unite in particular is leading the way in terms of including people who are not employed, and I think that it's inclusion of unemployed people and inclusion of students is a good thing. But I also think that there's a lot more to democracy, and for me, having worked with you in the Stop the War Coalition for 10 years, when I've been in Hyde Park or outside Parliament, that's when I felt the most in my whole life that I was expressing my democratic rights. So I think it's really important, that even if you're not in a trade union, you're involved with the Coalition Resistance and Counterfire and the Stop the War Coalition and the student movement and all the progressive movements that are going on at the moment. And in that way we can actually, get more democracy, because that's what we need, not less democracy. Thanks.
Thanks very much for all the contributions. I'm afraid we've run out of time for discussion. I'm going to just bring back the speakers for a brief